Good afternoon, everybody, distinguished guests, industry partners, ladies and gentlemen. There are many familiar faces around this room, and I'm sure over the course of today and the next couple of days, you'll get to know one another better. I was mulling over what to say, and I was sitting with both Frederick and Sunny over there, and I was only praying that my speech had synced onto my phone. But like the Crimson Sunbird, which Frederick mentioned, it's both a hybrid of a robot as well as our unofficial Singapore bird. But you always must have something which is human, something nature. But coming back into this, as I was preparing for this speech, I thought about what we are trying to achieve here. And it brought me to think about a superhero which I looked up to as a boy. And I'm sure many of you might know him. It's Iron Man. Because what was most fascinating about Iron Man? Some people say, Tony Stark is a billionaire or he has cool gadgets. But actually, as a geek, the geek in me has always been fascinated by his arc reactor. You know that, right? Yeah. In fact, I wanted to bring this light here and put it on my chest. But this arc reactor is this thing that he put it on his chest. It is actually conceptualized as a miniature tokamak, right? It's a torus-shaped chamber using powerful magnetic fields to confine high-energy plasma and power a clean fusion reaction. Now, I've been to Devon, Massachusetts, and I've seen a tokamak. You can't really miniaturize it. It's still very much fiction. But if you are able to do that, for Tony Stark, it served two purposes. First, it kept our hero alive. And second, it generated immense catalytic energy that is required for him to do all of his cool stuff. Great big feats. But to me, this arc reactor, fictional as it may be, was the ultimate metaphor for clean, limitless technology. Today, as we gather for the 4th edition of the GenZero Climate Summit, I believe that we are all here to construct our own real-world arc reactor, because we too are locked in a struggle to keep our planet alive. Because when we look at global climate challenges, we are fundamentally looking at a trajectory, an arc of emissions, of rising temperatures, and of ecological impact. Because for too long, the conversation surrounding this arc, surrounding this trajectory, has been framed in stark binary terms, which is very much the theme of your conference. Binary terms in terms of growth versus sustainability, energy security versus decarbonization, technology versus nature-based solutions. But these are all false divides, and we cannot allow these false divides to lead us if we are to make any progress on our climate ambitions. Because in reality, whether we succeed or whether we fail depends on our ability to bring all of these priorities together. If you think about an arc, in its very shape, it's a bridge, right? And it's often used to connect different parts together, divides together. So we ought to use it to connect technology, finance, innovation, to build a single resilient pathway forward. And that's why platforms for collaboration and partnership like this summit are increasingly vital. Because to move from ambition, which is basically talk, to action, we must get 3 things right, if I may. First, we must sustain momentum on climate action even in a more uncertain global environment. Second, we must strengthen trust and credibility across carbon markets to build a reliable foundation. Fred, we talked about the trust being absolutely critical this morning. Third, we must build stronger partnerships to scale these climate solutions effectively. So allow me to go and unpack these bit by bit. In many parts of the world, the climate agenda has slipped down the list of immediate priorities. Facing intense economic pressures and geopolitical volatility, governments are already recalibrating their commitments. The ongoing conflict in the Middle East has compounded these challenges further, disrupting global energy markets and shifting focus towards short-term survival. Yet, geopolitical and economic uncertainty does not slow the physical realities of climate change, even if some of us think that it ought to. It doesn't. Around the world, there are more frequent heat waves, devastating floods, prolonged droughts, and extreme weather events, each with profound social and economic costs. But at the same time as we deal with these climate events, we are also learning a critical lesson that energy, security, and sustainability are not opponents. In fact, they are deeply interconnected. And so transitioning to more diversified, cleaner energy systems is precisely what we will need to strengthen our long-term resilience and insulate us from volatile fossil fuel markets. And periods of uncertainty like this can tempt us to delay decisions or to freeze investments, to be short-term. But it is exactly because we are maybe inclined to do the short-term that we must do the exact opposite. Because when it comes to the climate crisis, any cause of inaction and delay will only compound over time. So we cannot let the arc of our progress be affected when we need it to climb. It's been more than 10 years since the historic Paris Agreement was signed. Already 10 years. Since then, global climate ambition has strengthened significantly. Net zero commitments now cover the vast majority of global emissions. And more countries, many of you are very familiar with, have introduced carbon pricing and climate disclosure requirements. And financial institutions are increasingly factoring climate risks into how they allocate capital. These are encouraging milestones. Yesterday, I was speaking to a leader of an Asian bank, and we talked about AI, we talked about tokenization, and then he had asked me, what about sustainability and climate finance? So these are top of mind, and I'm glad that it is top of mind with our leaders in the financial institutions. So our focus must now shift. It must now shift from setting long-term targets to actively reducing emissions. So it's not just setting the targets, but what are we doing on the ground? And most importantly, to accurately measure progress. So this means we must mobilize capital at scale and deploy practical solutions, especially within hard-to-abate sectors. Carbon markets thus have a very indispensable role to play here. Because when carbon markets function effectively, they serve as a conduit, channeling finance towards high-impact projects and making abatement more cost-economical across different geographies. But for carbon markets to scale, they need two foundational pillars, trust and credibility. Right now, the market suffers from this fragmentation. There are different standards, different methodologies, different taxonomies, which are emerging across different jurisdictions. Meanwhile, the definitions of what constitute a high-quality carbon credit are also constantly shifting. Now, this fragmentation is obviously not helpful to all of us because it creates deep uncertainty for both buyers and investors. It inflates the transaction costs, and it slows down the deployment of capital into vital climate solutions. So to enter our next phase of market development, we need greater international alignment. This is where Singapore, I think, can play a little bit of a part, because we aim to contribute constructively by playing three distinct roles. First, as a platform, to convene all of you here today, convening governments, businesses, market participants, to align standards and also collective action. But beyond a platform, we also hope to be a partner, working with industry and international stakeholders to scale practical solutions. And beyond platforms and partnerships, to then be a connector, linking supply and demand across diverse markets and geographies. And we don't just talk about this, we have actually a few concrete initiatives to address the barriers of cost, the barriers of capital, and the barrier of uncertainty. Go into a bit of economics now. On the supply side, we are catalyzing new projects. Our Economic Development Board, EDB, has a carbon project development grant. which was launched in COP29. This helps to bridge critical early-stage financing gaps for project developers, catalyzing the supply of new Article 6 carbon credits, of new Article 6 aligned projects. Now, EDB is here today, and they will share more details of additional grantees in the coming days. Then, on the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, the Financial Sector Carbon Market Development Grant, which was launched last October, supports financial institutions' active participation in carbon markets by reducing near-term cost barriers, helping to build the foundation for their sustained long-term involvement. So that is the supply side, and EDB, as well as MAS, is doing their part to provide that. We also need to address the demand side issue. And for the demand side, we need to establish clear rules of engagement for the supply side to link up with the demand side. Therefore, the VCM, the Voluntary Carbon Market Guidance, also launched last October by the Singapore government, provides clear assurance to businesses on how to use high-quality carbon credits as part of a credible, science-based decarbonisation plan. But we are also listening very closely to industry, so please give us all your feedback, whether this works, whether we are actually making the correct market infrastructure and making markets. Last month, GenZero, Ng & Co. and PwC Singapore, in partnership with the Singapore Sustainable Finance Association, SSFA, released an important position paper. Now, we've studied this position paper. It called for clarity on the legal nature of carbon credits as a foundational building block to scale the voluntary carbon market. Now, we're studying these recommendations very carefully. Fred will be happy that we're doing so, to see how we can build on our existing VCM guidelines and guidance so that we can give companies the legal and regulatory clarity that you need to participate in the voluntary carbon market with confidence. Finally, it's building stronger partnerships, because no one single country nor one single company can fix today's fragmentation, which I talked about. So we need to pull our strengths to scale climate solutions globally. For Singapore, and we talked about this earlier on, why is Singapore important and why we're doing this? In fact, the Article 6 carbon market to us is of paramount importance. As a small alternative energy disadvantaged city-state, high-integrity Article 6 carbon credits are a crucial complement to our domestic decarbonization efforts. And that is why we are actively building carbon market partnerships with countries across the world. Let me give you the proof, because my colleagues and I have been traveling the world signing these agreements. In fact, we have signed 11 Article 6 implementation agreements, IAs, with partner countries such as Ghana, I think there are representatives from Ghana here today, Bhutan, and Peru, and also with our ASEAN neighbors such as Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And these are implementation agreements. Then we also have MOUs, which we hope to turn into implementation agreements, and we have about 20 of these. But implementation agreements and MOUs are just one part of the equation. We are also working closely with businesses to mobilize capital and crowd-in investment for Article 6 carbon credits project under these implementation agreements. And I've seen firsthand how this matters. If you allow me, I'm just going to give you a practical reason why. I traveled to Ghana after we signed our first Singapore-Ghana IA, leading our first business mission of 22 Singapore-based companies to Accra, Ghana, to facilitate business matching with our Ghanaian counterparts. And we have also organized many of these business missions to Peru, Paraguay, Chile, and I've spoken to Fred, we will do more to unlock the pipeline of Article 6 carbon credits. So if you have an idea, you want me to go, I'm happy to go make that trip. Because sovereign buyers around the world are actively looking for Article 6 markets to bridge their transition gap and to meet their climate targets. And that's why international cooperation in this space is so critical. Hence, I'm pleased today to announce that Singapore will contribute $15 million to the Global Green Growth Institute's Carbon Transition Facility, alongside our partners, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Norway, and Sweden. It's a start, it's seed money, but this will support two vital pillars. The first pillar is the Article 6 Readiness Facility, which focuses on building institutional capacity in host countries. The second pillar is the Singapore Article 6 Carbon Facility, which supports the development of projects that generate the high-quality carbon credits Singapore can procure to help meet our climate targets. And with these two pillars, they can address both sides of the equation, strengthening supply where technical capacity is lacking, and also anchoring demand with high-integrity frameworks the market needs to thrive. But even as we strengthen these foundations, there is one key challenge that remains. That is corporate demand remains fragmented. Corporate demand remains fragmented. And buyers are understandably cautious. So you will need to provide policy guidance and market infrastructure. But both of these, even so, if we provide them, they are not enough. So we must actively coordinate and aggregate demand. We must be active participants if we are to make markets. This brings us back to my childhood dream of an engine that is capable of generating immense, self-sustaining catalytic energy. Because if we were to truly bend the warming curve, we cannot rely on incremental, isolated efforts. We need what I earlier said is a real-world arc reactor for the carbon market. A real-world arc reactor for the carbon market. It's an engine that fuses policy, capital, and corporate commitment into a single high-output force. With that vision in mind, I'm proud to launch the Action for a Resilient Climate Coalition, the ARC Coalition, today. You see, I spent a lot of time on the speech to try to get to this ARC Coalition. Well, the ARC Coalition is an industry-led carbon buyers coalition, bringing together forward-thinking corporate buyers who are serious about their decarbonisation journey and to support the use of high-integrity carbon credits to complement their direct emission reduction efforts. And Enterprise Singapore, and my colleagues are here, Park Seng and Amrita, and the team, is proud to play a key role in supporting this effort. In fact, Cindy is our erstwhile chairman. Cindy, if you want to, she's our arc reactor. She's our Tony Stark, basically. The ARC Coalition is designed to act as our market's catalyst and focus on 4 key objectives. First, to aggregate demand by convening corporate buyers to drive the adoption of high-integrity carbon credits with a collective target to procure at least 10 million tons of offsets by 2030. Second, to unlock financing by developing and implementing a dedicated financing facility to channel much-needed capital into early-stage, high-quality carbon projects. And third, to set the bar on standards by establishing transparent, robust criteria to guide carbon credit selection and use, drawing on leading international principles and frameworks so as to uphold market integrity. And fourth, to improve access by streamlining the procurement process through a curated system of project assessment, selection, and contracting, allowing buyers to transact with confidence. So this ARC Coalition reflects a simple, powerful belief that policy and markets work best when they work in tandem, and that decarbonisation and economic growth are not competing priorities, but they are in fact mutually reinforcing forces. So allow me to conclude, and thank you for indulging me because it's a lot to unpack. Well, the path to net zero, this path to a net zero future is becoming more complex. But complexity we must never let complexity be an excuse for us to delay. Instead, complexity should in fact inspire deeper collaboration, stronger coordination, and bolder innovation. When I set out today, I spoke of Iron Man's arc reactor as a device built for survival, an engine designed to generate the catalytic energy needed to power great feats. The ARC Coalition we launched today is like this real-world arc reactor. It is the engine that will fuse the immense energy of corporate commitment, sovereign capacity, and global finance. And by keeping this engine self-sustaining, we ensure that our markets, our industries, and our planets do not just survive, but actively thrive. Thank you, and I wish you a wonderful conference ahead. Thank you.